The film opens in Australia, where we meet a Canadian named Greg and an English woman called Heather. They are tourists staying at the same hotel, and on that day, they decided to try the Tucker's Tour, an excursion promising thrilling encounters with sharks. Tucker arrived and introduced himself. He seemed pleased to learn that they were not a couple, and Heather regained some confidence thanks to the captain's compliment. The three then set out, and Tucker began sharing his story with the tourists, recounting a shark encounter he had experienced as a child. He claimed the bite hadn't bothered him much, though the large scar on his body suggested otherwise. The lighthearted mood shifted when Heather asked who had taken care of you after the incident. Tucker grew quiet and admitted he had been alone back then. Soon, it was time to dive, and Greg tried to steady his companion when he nearly backed out at the sight of the first fin. Tucker suggested a moment of calm, asking them to hold each other's hands and close their eyes, describing it as an old maritime tradition. In the midst of that stillness, he began singing Baby Shark, the beloved children's song. Heather found it so unexpectedly amusing that she completely let her guard down, and before she knew it, she found herself locked inside a cage with Greg, surrounded by sharks gliding through the water around them. After the initial jolt of fear, Heather reached for her companion's arm and managed to surrender to the breathtaking beauty of the moment. When Tucker announced that their time was up, the two emerged from the cage in a state of quiet awe, and Greg began thanking him for guiding them through the experience. That sense of wonder quickly turned to horror when Tucker suddenly lunged at Greg with a blade without warning and pushed him off the boat, leaving Heather frozen in terror. Not far away lies the Gold Coast, where a young American woman named Zephyr has been living. In a small convenience store, she crosses paths with a man named Musa, who was dealing with car trouble and couldn't find the cable he needed to buy. In the parking lot, Zephyr tossed her soda cup into the trash and retrieved the ice cream she had hidden inside to avoid paying. Shortly after, she ran into Musa again and tried to play it cool, but he had seen exactly what she'd done and hinted he'd report her to the store unless she lent him the cable. Faced with her irritation, he softened his tone and explained that he had walked several blocks under the blazing sun, pleading with her to give him a ride back to his car. Along the way, she asked about his formal attire, and he explained he was a real estate agent. Despite their rocky start and clashing personalities, the two found a surprising common ground through their shared love of surfing, then discovered their music tastes were remarkably similar as well. Eventually, Zephyr let her guard down and gave him a chance, spending the evening with him. Yet, while Musa was clearly taken with her, going so far as to prepare a full meal, Zephyr hadn't grown attached to anyone, and she was already gone before the pancakes were ready. When she pulled up beside the beach, she realized her car key had been left back at the man's place. Spotting a truck parked just a few meters away, she began searching for a key she could use, announcing to herself that she intended to return it. Her heart seized with fear when she heard the owner approaching. Then she saw him, Tucker, smiling at the girl who had gotten herself caught red-handed. He offered her a keychain as a gift, saying he had plenty of them, and praised her for having the courage to go surfing on her own. Zephyr didn't flinch. She pointed out that he was alone too, thanked him for the gift, and said her goodbyes before turning her attention back to adjusting her board. Just then, Musa sent her a photo of the feast he'd prepared, adding a bit of dramatic flair, and asked if he could join her for a surf. Zephyr replied, yes, then thought better of it and responded more coolly, reminding him that the ocean was open to everyone. Even so, she never got the chance to see Musa's reply. Her head was suddenly forced into a plastic bag as Tucker attacked from behind. Once he had overpowered her, he administered a sedative to keep her from waking too quickly, and secured tape over her mouth as a precaution. Then he hid her inside a wooden crate and transported her to the harbor. As soon as he arrived, Dave's dog started barking, and Tucker responded with a threatening look before heading off to secure his captive. Meanwhile, Moses had not given up on trying to win Zephyr over with a sweet gesture, and he soon found her truck parked near the beach. As he tried calling out to her, Zephyr regained consciousness, her mouth tightly sealed with tape and her wrists bound to a bed. In desperation, she tore the tape off and began questioning Heather, who was tied to the bed beside her. Heather explained that they were being held inside a cabin aboard Tucker's boat and apologized for the foul smell coming from a bucket, explaining that she had been stuck there for quite some time. Hearing this, panic took hold of Zephyr, and she began shouting for help. But Heather broke down in tears and assured her that no one would hear her. It became clear she was telling the truth. The boat was far out at sea, with no other vessels nearby. The room they were in was part of the storage area, and a warning sign indicated that the door must remain closed at all times to prevent accidents. Heather's face lit up when she realized that Zephyr had useful skills for the situation, and she helped her search for something sharp to free the restraints. Despite drawing strength from her determination, Zephyr was also shaken when she noticed a woman's name written on the corner of the wall, suggesting that they were not the first victims and that others had barely survived since Tucker was still at large. While Tucker fished calmly on the deck, Zephyr asked whether anyone might be looking for Heather, but the answer was not encouraging. When she returned the question, Zephyr replied that no one would be looking for her either, unaware that Moses was still thinking about her after seeing her truck being towed away. Knowing that the vehicle was Zephyr's home, Moses sensed something was wrong and immediately headed to the police station. However, when the officer learned that the girl was a traveling surfer, he assumed she had likely gotten herself into some kind of trouble and did not make much effort to pursue the matter. As Zephyr kicked against the bed frame, still trying to free herself, Heather lamented not listening to her mother's advice. Her mother had not wanted her to spend her gap year traveling, fearing stories about young women journeying alone. Moreover, the trip would delay her life plan, which included graduating, working, and getting married. Despite the circumstances, Zephyr maintained her optimistic outlook on life, saying that such a life might have been ideal for Heather's mother, but not for her. She had to follow her own path. Heather then asked about Zephyr's family, and she revealed that she had grown up in orphanages in America before deciding to move as far away as possible. In the middle of their conversation, Zephyr noticed the underwire in Heather's bra, so Heather removed the top to pull it out. As soon as she tossed the wire to Zephyr, she began working on the restraints, but had to stop and pretend to remain calm when she heard someone approaching. Tucker entered the storage room carrying a light meal for the captives. Heather hesitated between quenching her thirst and risking their plan, as he might grow suspicious if he noticed her without her top. Thirst won. Zephyr helped distract him, firmly demanding food. Tucker took the bait and launched into a speech about predators, explaining that there was only one leader aboard the boat. Zephyr returned the bra to Heather as soon as he left and quickly tried to untie it, but she began to break out in a cold sweat and feel unwell. Only when Heather passed out did she realize there was something in the water they had drunk, and she ended up dropping the cord to the floor. Tucker grabbed the cord as soon as he returned and waited until she, too, lost consciousness. Zephyr woke up tied to a chair on the deck, seeing Heather suspended from a kind of crane. As Tucker prepared a video camera, he began delivering another speech, this time praising sharks as the most powerful creatures on Earth. Then cut a lock of Heather's hair as she slowly regained consciousness. Zephyr was horrified when she saw the crane being raised, realizing that Tucker intended to offer Heather to the sharks as food. Heather screamed and trembled violently as the crane arm lowered her toward the water so he could capture the moment on camera. A shark appeared and bit her, and she struggled fiercely. She was still alive as her leg disappeared beneath the surface, and the creature retreated, satisfied. Tucker carefully recorded every moment, even capturing Zephyr's reaction at the end. When she was returned to the storage room, Zephyr discovered more names hidden beneath layers of paint on the wall. Tucker celebrated in a disturbing dance, storing the lock of hair along with the videotape in a cabinet filled with previous records, preparing for the next offering. He then wrote Zephyr's name on a card. The next day, the boat began drifting away from Heather's body, which floated on the surface of the water. Meanwhile, Moses remained preoccupied with Zephyr, and his concern deepened when he discovered that her surfboard was missing. When Tucker came down with the day's meal, Zephyr angrily kicked the tray and told him he should look in the mirror. He had far more in common with worms or ocean waste than with sharks. Despite her outburst, Tucker refused to lose his composure and merely commented on the bucket, reminding her that she was the one in a difficult situation. What he didn't realize was that this only worked in her favor once she found herself alone again. She began dismantling the bucket, intending to use a piece of it as a weapon. Tucker ate his dinner while replaying footage of Heather's fate, then prepared the next syringe. But as he moved closer, Zephyr drove her improvised blade into his neck and grabbed his keys while he was disoriented. She quickly freed herself and began searching his pockets when he suddenly regained consciousness. Zephyr rushed outside and tried to lock him inside the storage room, but he blocked the door with his body. She fled toward the stairs, and he quickly caught up, jabbing the needle into her leg. She retaliated with a kick to his face that sent him crashing down, allowing her to escape to the upper deck, where she attempted to call for help over the radio. Dizziness soon overtook her as she looked out the window and spotted a nearby boat. On the verge of losing consciousness, she waved frantically and tried to shout, but her voice barely emerged. The other vessel was hosting a loud party with blaring music. Tucker soon appeared and found it amusing to see her holding the video camera stand as if she intended to fight him. Realizing she didn't have the strength to resist, she threw the camera into the water and slipped off the boat. She lost consciousness almost immediately after diving, but her arm caught onto a hook that began pulling her back. Moses, still distressed by her disappearance, used an application that grants access to surveillance cameras where he noticed a tow truck passing directly behind Zephyr's vehicle. Believing the driver might have more information, he focused on the logo on the door and identified Tucker's contact details. When no one answered, he left a message asking Tucker to call him back, without explaining the reason. At the same time, Tucker risked returning to the marina docks to retrieve another video camera, where Dave was surprised to see him nearby. Dave tried to give him the number of a group of wealthy clients interested in the tour, but Tucker impatiently turned his back on him. Moses, in the captain's absence, he began snooping around the boat and eventually heard Zephyr knocking against the wall. He broke a window on the deck and rushed into the storage area, unaware that Tucker was on his way back. Zephyr was still tied to the bed when Moses found her, and she urged him to call the police and look for something to free her. Trying to do both at once, Moses headed upstairs while making the call, but Tucker knocked him down the moment he reached the deck. Someone answered on the line, and Moses tried to shout, but he was struck repeatedly until he could no longer speak, and Tucker threw the phone away. Furious at the interference, Tucker slammed him against the wall and raised a hook to deliver a final blow. Suddenly, Moses regained his awareness and struck him with a shopping bag, quickly turning the situation around. Tucker was nearly overcome when Dave appeared to help him, striking Moses on the head with an oar. However, after Zephyr lost her gag, Dave finally heard her cries for help and began to realize that the situation was far more complicated than he had thought. Before he could fully grasp his mistake, Tucker struck him in the forehead with the hook, startling his dog, which began barking at him. Tucker then examined a map and plotted his next horrifying route before locking Moses up with Zephyr. Moses apologized for failing to rescue her and tried to convince her to open up to him, but she pushed him away once again, insisting she was better off alone. Soon after, they both felt the boat slowing down, and from the fear in Zephyr's expression, Moses sensed that something terrible was about to happen. It wasn't long before Tucker returned to the storage area to take them. Another feeding time had arrived. Zephyr was still under the effects of the sedatives, but she panicked when she woke up once again on the deck, only to find Moses trapped in the crane and Dave's remains scattered on the floor. She tried to save her friend, shouting that Moses was not a tourist and that his family had money, meaning they would not hesitate to look for him. None of this seemed to surprise Tucker. He lifted the young man over the water while sharks circled below. In a final attempt, Zephyr pleaded to take his place, insisting that Moses was a good person who did not deserve such a fate. Tucker mocked her sense of romance and lowered Moses partway into the water, just as he had done with Heather before. The fins closed in tightly around him, and the only thing Zephyr could do to help was urge him to stay completely still. With immense effort to control his fear, he followed her advice and remained motionless among the sharks, which did not attack him. Tucker grew furious at the sight of the creatures drifting away, but he refused to accept it. He pulled Moses back onto the boat and stabbed him in the abdomen. Zephyr cried out in anger at his cowardly act and the sharks returned the moment the blood spread through the water. Suddenly, Tucker stopped the crane and announced a short break as a Coast Guard helicopter flew overhead. This forced him to restrain the captives once again. Zephyr, still terrified for Moses, resolved to do whatever it took to free her hands. After a brief visit from Tucker, she broke her thumb and endured the pain until he left. When she realized that even then she couldn't slip her hand through the restraint, she made a drastic decision and began biting into her own hand until she tore her thumb free. When Tucker returned, he found nothing on the bed but her severed finger. He failed to notice Zephyr hiding behind the door. She escaped the storage room, locked Tucker inside, and ran to the cabin, where she saw they were near an island. As Tucker freed himself, she found a flare gun, but was forced to use it against him to escape. It didn't stop him for long. He prevented her from fleeing through the kitchen roof, grabbing hold of her legs. Zephyr struck him with a frying pan and cut his hand with a knife, buying herself enough time to jump into the sea and swim toward the island. Tucker could no longer track her once she was far enough away, so he pursued her by boat. A lavish party was taking place on the shore, but no one was on the sand when Zephyr reached it. Tucker arrived beside her in the boat, leapt at her, and quickly overpowered her until she lost consciousness, dragging her back without being noticed. This time, Moses was the one who woke up in the cabin and screamed when he saw Zephyr suspended, with much larger fins approaching her. Tucker was thrilled to realize it was a great white shark. He lowered the offering with excitement, even driving away a smaller shark to keep it from interfering. In doing so, he lost his spear, which Zephyr managed to grab and use to free herself from the crane. Tucker filmed all of it, unconcerned, knowing it would make the outcome even more satisfying. Moses shouted, warning that the great white was returning, and for a moment, everything fell into tense silence. Tucker broke it by startling Zephyr, who dropped into the water after freeing herself from the rope. Beneath the surface, she remained completely still when she saw the massive creature in front of her, gripping her injured hand tightly to prevent any trace of blood from spreading. The shark approached closely, then swam away without noticing her. Tucker remained fixated on the animal, while Zephyr climbed up the side of the boat and slipped back aboard. Moving silently, she grabbed another spear and signaled to Moses to stay quiet until she was in position. Tucker turned around too late to react. She fired the spear into his abdomen. He fell heavily into the water, groaning in pain as he struggled to swim back. Zephyr kept her eyes on him, ready to push him away if he tried to climb back up, but she didn't need to. Something powerful pulled him under. Tucker looked around in panic until the great white struck from below, seizing him in a violent leap. He managed to surface only once more, just long enough for his camera to capture one final close-up. Zephyr let out a breath of relief as she saw him disappear beneath the surface, but the spear rope wrapped around her legs and dragged her into the water. Moses screamed until he lost consciousness. Moments later, Zephyr resurfaced beside Tucker's lifeless body. As the partygoers passed by again, she ran to the boat and fired the flare gun. The other vessel was just a glowing dot on the horizon when she lit the signal and began shouting. But even then, she saw it begin to turn back toward them to help. She then went down to the deck and shook Moses awake, telling him she no longer wanted to live alone. Here are the highlights of our movie. We hope you liked it. Please support us by subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and leaving a nice comment. Take care and see you in the next movie recaps.